we are going to talk today, of course, about the only news anyone is talking about this weekend, which is the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty on all 5 counts: first-degree intentional homicide, first-degree reckless homicide, attempted first-degree intentional homicide, and 2 counts of reckless endangerment. Now, this verdict was met with predictable backlash from many on the left, on the online left. I went on Twitter right after it happened, and saw what I pretty much expected to see. That this is a miscarriage of justice and basically another victory for the white supremacist right wing. And my thesis of an article that I'm working on is that to many on the left and to many on the right, actually, this trial was more than just a trial. This was sort of a proxy for a larger political struggle, which the left views as, privileged white men seem to win out and get off scot-free all too often. And that, we're the shoe on the other foot. They say, if Rittenhouse was a black guy showing up armed to a MAGA rally and killed 2 people, he'd have likely not lived to see his day in court, which I think is accurate. And I said that in our live stream.
Absolutely.
So I think that there's some valid points to be made about the system in which basically allowed this to happen. In terms of the verdict itself, I think there is a problem with applying that kind of analysis to a murder trial, because questions of political and social dynamics, any assumptions you have about Kyle Rittenhouse's politics, any indignation you feel about how certain marginalized groups, be it people of color, battered spouses, immigrants, Muslims, right? They don't get the same benefit of the doubt when they defend themselves violently in self-defense that Kyle Rittenhouse got. Again, totally true. I would not argue that point. But those kinds of points, those political thoughts and feelings and ideas are not material to the central question, the only question that is relevant to a murder trial. In a murder trial, there's only one question that matters, and that is the defendant guilty or not, based on the law and the evidence of the case, which is why, as much as I empathize and sympathize with and share in a lot of the very same critiques that a lot of very angry leftists are making about what Kyle Rittenhouse represents, what he stands for, and what he sort of may aspire to be, right? This was a Blue Lives Matter, cop lover, Trump loving guy. As much as I agree with all of that, I share a lot of those same attitudes. The point of a murder trial is to determine the guilt or innocence in terms of a criminal trial, determine the criminality of a man. And based on your findings, that person could potentially spend 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, or the rest of his years in jail, which is why the burden of proof is on the prosecution. And for a jury to vote unanimously that he was guilty of first-degree homicide, attempted homicide, even the reckless endangerment, you would have to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt that Kyle Rittenhouse did what he is accused of. And those other political concerns are just that. They are political concerns. They are not legal concerns as it pertains to the specific dynamics of a murder trial in which someone's life hangs in the balance. And if you cannot make that distinction, then I think you're going down a very dangerous path. And so that would be my opening statement. I obviously have a lot more to say, but I've been speaking a lot. So, Russell, what are your impressions?
And the defense rests. So
don't talk.
So I think the way this has been covered, the way this has been processed on the level that you're talking about, I think we have a generation of activists that a small minority directly, but a larger number indirectly have been influenced by the various critical theories coming out of the universities, and this wave of activism is really animated by that kind of analysis, even again without necessarily being conscious of it, which in some ways is very dangerous because they don't seem to have really analyzed what assumptions they've absorbed. You go back to the 60s activists, people like the Chicago Seven, they had a deep belief in due process and American institutions. They felt that they were corrupted. They felt that they weren't working properly, but they had a deep belief in the premises. When you start going with the premise that lived truth and lived experience is on an equal footing with any other epistemology, that there is no kind of epistemology that can be claimed as actually objectively true, um, then that opens the door to all this. I mean, that whether or not Kyle Rittenhouse is legally guilty based on our system of justice is entirely besides the point, because he's guilty of representing a system to them. And that makes you guilty. The specifics of whether he's guilty of this is irrelevant based on this premise. And
You know,
I was
sorry, go ahead.
I was debating somebody about this who felt very much on the other, uber, uber, uber typical take on this. And I told the person, well, I feel that this generation of activists has made a very wrong turn. And I think if anything, we've set race relations back decades. And in the end, it's going to lead to Republican hegemony. You don't like Kyle Rittenhouse? Wait until he's in the fucking cabinet in 10 years, okay? Because this is part of what you're empowering by taking this turn, by taking a turn where reasonable people are going to look at you and say, yeah, these people aren't arguing the facts. They're arguing a broader abstract point that they can't that cannot be the basis of justice in a pluralistic society. You cannot bring in, what if Kyle Rittenhouse, and there is no evidence of this that I'm aware of, what if Kyle Rittenhouse was a white supremacist? That wouldn't actually make him any more guilty of the charges against him than he was. So what are you accomplishing by
I would
trying to
say,
you're basically taking apart the core premises of our system of justice, and that's different from questioning its outcomes and its fairness. Valid.
of
But
course, right.
now you're getting into, well, you're a white supremacist, you should be found guilty, right?
Exactly. And this is why I say that, when you say Rittenhouse represents a system, to a lot of these people, I think that is somewhat true in that he represents sort of, but you know what? I would say no. I would say you more hit the nail on the head in that last thing you said, was he represents the outcomes of a system that they feel are unjust. But to them, he doesn't actually represent the whole system, because if you look at the whole system, you must see Kyle Rittenhouse as a simple cog in that machine, as a moving part. Kyle Rittenhouse is an output of the system, not an input of the
Right,
system. He's not an
right,
architect
right,
of the
right.
system.
Sure.
But that distinction is completely lost on many liberals, and I'm sorry to say, many leftists who I saw online yesterday, because in their minds, uh, locking up Kyle Rittenhouse would accomplish some sort of justice somehow. How? I saw people posting things like, Tamir Rice, whatever he was, I think a 12-year-old boy playing with a toy gun, he
Right,
was
right.
shot.
Mm-hmm.
Kyle Rittenhouse, 18-year-old white boy, out with a live gun, kills two people, found not guilty. Okay, now I totally understand and agree with the perverse disparity
That
in
that
how
is
they were
that is
treated.
that is a fair systemic criticism.
It's a fair systemic criticism. However, how is that imbalance resolved by jailing
Exactly.
Kyle Rittenhouse for 50
Exactly.
years? It's
Exactly.
not. It's not. If anything, all you're doing there is perpetuating this same system of vengeance and hatred and retribution that has victimized generations of Black men and victimized generations of Black families. Black wives with a husband in jail, Black children with a father they've never met because he's in jail. That's the same idea that we can fix things by taking out our anger on individuals and locking them up. Another tweet that's been circulating is a tweet where somebody put out something like, I would like this explained to all of the battered spouses who are in jail for killing their abusive husbands in self-defense. Again, totally fair to say that there is a disgusting disparity in the way Rittenhouse is treated and the way those battered spouses are treated. The solution in that case, however, is to get those battered spouses out of prison because they don't belong there, not to lock up another person who doesn't belong there.
Right.
And like how is this lost on people? It's the old cliche that two wrongs don't make a right, you can kind of say, but it's worse than that. It's worse than that. There's something that is sort of malfunctioning in your analysis of politics if you think that by putting this guy in jail for the rest of his life, you are fixing a social problem. You are fixing a political problem. You are not. Even if he was guilty, to put him in jail would not be to fix that problem. Like Chauvin was guilty and they put him in jail. And it was better that they put him in jail than that they didn't because he deserved to go to jail.
Right.
But what systemic problem was fixed by doing that? None whatsoever. Because these systemic problems are not a result of individual people being made an example of or not. These are about much, much bigger issues, and the same people who were pushing the flat out lie, that Kyle Rittenhouse was a white supremacist terrorist, which is a lot of what these mainstream media people called him, to put out there only serves to further and empower the oligarchy, because what it does is it creates a false analysis of where the real power imbalance in the society lies. According to Joy Reid, the power imbalance in American society exists between privileged white males and everyone else. And in reality, the power imbalance exists between rich people who buy politicians and everyone else. This is going to seem unrelated. This seems like a bit of a tangent, but stick with me here. The second most expensive part of this new quote unquote Build Back Better Act is the SALT tax deduction, which is state and local tax deductions for rich people in high tax states, i.e. blue states. Let me just explain what that means. The Democrats are now going to spend $280 billion over the next 10 years lowering the taxes for rich people in blue states, which is another word, another way of saying Democratic Party donors. That's what they're doing. They're literally giving a tax break to the people who write their checks. Now, this is the same party.
I'm really offended by that because we were volunteering in Virginia. We really don't appreciate
it. Right, exactly. This is because I want to contrast this with, this is the same Democratic Party that said that $9 billion a year on tuition-free community college is too much. We cannot afford that. They are giving triple that, $28 billion a year over the next 10 years to tax breaks for their donors. Okay? That tells you where the real power imbalance lies. The rich, connected people are getting a tax break from the anti-fascist party, the anti-Trump party, from the party that cried what I would say are crocodile tears about this Rittenhouse verdict. Jerry Nadler saying this is a horrible, thing for justice, as you're signing a bill that is literally denying people the tools they need to pull themselves out of the situations that Jacob Blake was in, out of the situations that George Floyd was in, denying them that lifeline so that they can enrich their donors. They're upper middle class, wealthy citizen donors. That is where the power lies. Not
Keaton,
to say that
I
there's no
resent
such
that.
thing. Hold on,
They
let me
are
just have 30 more
lowering the
seconds.
cost of 10 drugs.
Exactly. Let me just have 30
fuck
more
you,
seconds.
man. You're negative Nancy, Keith.
This is not to say that there are not certain privileges that white people enjoy that black people don't, obviously. And not all of that is related to where you stand in terms of how much money you have in the bank. I grew up in a white suburb. My next door neighbors were old African Americans. The black man who lived next door to us would get pulled over every now and then on his way home by a cop who would pull him over and said, "What are you doing here?" Didn't run a stop sign, no broken taillight, nothing. Polo, what are you doing here? He lived in the same neighborhood as us. It was a middle class area. I didn't grow up working class. I grew up middle class. My parents caught the same wave of fortune that Russell Hugh caught as a carriage driver in the 90s. They were they were artisans. They were street artisans. They happened to catch a decade where you can make a decent living doing that. But anyway, we had probably a comparable amount of money in the bank, and he got pulled over and we didn't. So yes, of course, I would never deny the existence of a certain white privilege. But that is not where the major power imbalance in this country lies. And to put Kyle Rittenhouse out as a symbol of oppressive political power at a moment when the party that is supposed to be addressing these imbalances is funneling $28 billion a year to their donors while telling you we can't afford to send you to community college, that is indicative of where the real power imbalance lies, not with Kyle fucking dipshit Rittenhouse. Okay, you're being punked here. You are being played for a fool here. And unfortunately, a lot of you are fucking fools from what I saw online yesterday. Sorry to say.
Careful.
Not
Careful.
you, the listeners. I mean, the broader online Twitter left community.
Yeah. I know who.
Certainly not our patrons. The patrons definitely not fools.
The patrons, they can do no wrong.
Right.
Those people shit gold. Their gold smells. Their shit smells like tulips.
Yeah.
It's well.
Speaking of this, one of our patrons, Sean Maluli, posted in the chat: the solution to unequal police treatment of black people is for the police to treat black people better, not to treat white people worse. Exactly.
Well, this is we've talked about this in an economic context. You have all these people talking about white people are angry because they're losing their privilege, and what they're not seeing is, okay, you didn't raise anybody up. You just brought a formerly privileged white working class down to the level that people of color have always been at. So nobody really gained. It's just misery loves company, I guess. Like everybody now can be in the shit. Well, Bezos is in space. And you guys are talking about microaggressions down here on Earth.
And Donald Trump gained.
instead of uniting to take his money.
Donald Trump gained because this is how a guy like Trump rises to power, is exactly what you were saying. Yes, take the white working class who used to earn 75 grand a year plus benefits working their factory job, immiserate them, bring them down 3-4 notches on the economic ladder to the point where they're working at Walmart. And then when they complain about that, you say, well, you're just complaining because you don't have the power you once had over black and brown people. And what their answer to that is, you ruined my fucking life. And now you're going to accuse me of being bitter about my power over other people being taken away. I was working at a fucking factory, making 75 grand a year, living my life. I wasn't oppressing anybody, right? This isn't to say they don't enjoy certain privileges that black people don't. And there could be a conversation about getting people to acknowledge that's fine. You don't tell a person like that they're bitter that their power has been stripped from them, and then expect them to vote for you. I guarantee you,
they were Leonardo DiCaprio and Django.
Right, exactly.
Before
I guarantee I have never, and we're going to get into some of the specific facts of the case, but we're on a roll here. I have never been more certain that Donald Trump will win the 2024 election in a landslide as I am right now, as a result of what I've seen in the last 24 hours. You are driving people. You could not push people harder into the arms of Donald Trump than you are pushing him now with this outrageous rhetoric about how this kid should have be in jail for the rest of his life. I promise you, at this rate, he will win in a landslide. That is a promise. I guarantee it. That unless you change course dramatically, it is a landslide. You know, we talk, we have fun, we make fun of Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden farting in front of the Pope or whatever. Talk about in bad what shape the Democrats are in. I'm telling you, at this rate, you could nominate the ghost of JFK and he would lose to Trump in a landslide if this is what you represent as a political movement.
Well, it
and
is.
and I'm certain of it. I'm absolutely certain of it.
Well, it's really interesting because everybody there was such Schadenfreude in 2012 when Obama won, and because Fox had really misled its viewers about Mitt Romney's chances. You know, Fox viewers were just completely blindsided. Like they just lived in a parallel universe where Mitt Romney was going to just take Obama down. Whereas it was very obvious that Romney was nowhere near winning that election. He was never close to winning that election. And, you know, the liberal press, you know, Morning Joe, they had a field day with that. You know, oh, I feel bad for the poor suckers. You know, the conservative media is not informing its viewers. They're making business decisions that are good for them. And it's not really informing their listeners and their viewers. And this is the same thing, man. It's the same thing. They think that this is a winning message because their media, which is, look, it's on the TV. Right? It's on almost every channel is saying that this is the way people look at things. So it must be, right? Like they haven't, a lot of them haven't figured out yet that whatever the corporate media is saying is a counter indicator of what people are thinking. You should assume the opposite is popular opinion from what you see. It's an elite bubble that pumps out elite opinion and elite propaganda. And the combination of the fact that once the Democrats lost the economic rationale for their existence, they went all in on identity politics, and they just have to keep people at each other's throats to explain why they exist as a party at all at this point. And the fact that the media, it's a hot medium. You know, you want people fighting. You want people arguing. You want tension. You want violence. You want anger. The combination of those two things has brought us to the verge of collapse as a country. I mean, you watch how these kinds of conversations play out. You know, I mentioned before we came on that I kind of stayed away from this story for a while because it was so clear to me that it was one of those cultural touchstone kind of trials where nobody's going to analyze it rationally and everyone's just going to pick their side and filter everything through that lens. And I don't dig stories like that. And I mentioned OJ, but actually that's not a fair comparison. We just weren't as fucked up as a country back during the OJ trial. Like the conversation we had around the OJ trial was more rational. Like, yes, you did have that black-white divide, which was the main takeaway that most black people agreed with the verdict. But it's kind of a myth that they agreed with the verdict because they thought he wasn't guilty. They liked the verdict because they liked seeing a rich black man get away with murder like a rich white man would for a change. That it wasn't so much that they watched that trial and said, oh, no, he didn't do it. Right?
Right. But that was less harmful in a way because at least you are watching someone get away with something. You're not watching, you know, like what's the old adage? I'd rather see one innocent, guilty man go, 99 guilty men go free than one innocent man be jailed. One innocent man hang. Yeah. Now there are practical implications of that don't quite make sense.
That idea has really fallen out of favor these days.
Well, I think it's a little out of balance. I mean, if 99 guilty men went free for every one innocent man, you'd have a whole lot of like violent criminals just getting away with shit and probably have a lot more, you know, social unrest. But anyway, We don't have to
Well,
nitpick that
whoever
phrase.
said that watched a lot of Hitchcock and read a lot of Dostoevsky.
Exactly. But speaking of getting away with, not getting away with, I would just like to, because we're
I,
about
I, I
25 minutes in.
I want to read some of Taibbi's take on this because
All right. Well, I think I should preface it with reading some of my take on this.
fuck yeah, it's your show.
Well, no, hold on. Not my take
Fuck
on
that.
this, but no, but I because in the article that I'm working on, I did make a point. That's why it's coming out a little long.
Oh, so
To
this
really
isn't the other
go
one. This
through,
is a new one.
yeah, to really go through what actually happened, right? To really go through the events of the night, because we're talking about all this as if the verdict was correct, and so far we haven't explained why the evidence does not point to conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. So this is just what happened. Okay, this is just a retelling of what happened. Now, if you can't stomach a retelling of what happened, if it doesn't matter to you what happened, if you only see Rittenhouse as a symbol of a certain political force that you want to crush, and you think that it is legitimate to crush that force by locking people in jail simply because you don't like them or what they stand for, then, there's not much I could do for you. But anyway, this is basically what happened here. So the first victim was Joseph Rosenbaum. He had been starting a fire earlier that night, and when people confronted him over it, this is what was said in court. Rosenbaum said, "If I catch any of you guys alone tonight, I'm going to fucking kill you." That's what Rosenbaum said earlier that evening when he was starting a fire and people tried to get him to put it out. Now, Rittenhouse was apparently within earshot of him when he said that, so he kind of took that as maybe being a threat to him personally. Whether or not it was a threat to him personally, you could definitely see that this guy is actually out to cause trouble and provoke violent confrontations, right? I mean, that is a deliberately inflammatory statement that invites violence. Later on that night, it's on video. This is all on video, and I've linked to the video in the article. Rosenbaum chasing Rittenhouse through a parking lot. Rittenhouse is seen running away. And then after Rosenbaum catches up to him and kind of lunges at him for the weapon, the same guy who said, "If I catch any of you guys alone tonight, I'm going to kill you." That's when Rittenhouse opened fire on him. He fired 4 shots and fatally wounded him. While someone else was wrapping up Rosenbaum's wounds in a shirt, Rittenhouse ran towards the cops. Okay. He was followed by a group of people who had seen that shooting, and they sought to disarm him themselves. It is seen on tape that Rittenhouse tells them, "I'm going to get the police." It's possible they didn't hear that because it was a loud, chaotic situation. All right. And so when Aaron Huber and Gage Grosskreutz, I think that's how you say his name, when they attacked him, Aaron Huber is the guy who hit him over the head with the skateboard. Rittenhouse shot him, fatally wounded him. And then Rittenhouse pulled his gun on Grosskreutz, who puts his hands up. He freezes. He puts his hands up, and Rittenhouse didn't shoot him. And then Grosskreutz, who had a gun in his hand, lunged toward Kyle Rittenhouse, who then fired 1 shot into his arm, wounding him. And of course, Grosskreutz lived. Now, so that's what happened. Okay. Now, I haven't seen anyone who has actually examined that evidence or has really followed the trial in even like a nominal way. I don't see anyone dispute that that was a timeline and that Rittenhouse was, in fact, attacked by the people who he shot. He did not attack them first. He was being attacked, and he responded by shooting them. Okay. So what that means is that the essential thrust of the argument for people who wanted to see a guilty verdict here is that the very act of bringing that AR-15 into that situation was itself a reckless provocation and a sort of de facto forfeiture of any legitimate claim to self-defense. Okay. And so this claim that Rittenhouse sought to provoke violent confrontation that night, the fact of showing up there with that weapon, was itself a provocative act. That is the linchpin of the argument, because based on what actually physically transpired, you can't possibly say that he provoked those confrontations. The only way it makes sense that he is guilty of provoking this violence is if you can establish that bringing that weapon into that situation was itself a provocation of violence. And so I should say that, look, personally, I actually agree that bringing an automatic weapon to a riot should be against the law And it should be itself considered an act of reckless endangerment. And
Of
were
course it
these
should.
laws on the books, his self-defense claim would be much less valid, because in that case, it wouldn't matter what his feelings or intentions were. We could
Right.
say, look, you might feel that you are here to keep the peace and maintain order, but there are laws on the books. Those laws represent the result of a democratic process in which we came together, we debated the issues, we elected politicians who then passed laws that says, look, no matter what you feel about being this sort of, Second Amendment self-defense, don't tread on me, gun-toting, upholder of law and order, no matter what you feel about that, no matter what your intentions were, we have come together and said, no, actually, we are deeming it so that this is a more dangerous and destructive thing to do, and that the cons outweigh the pro of this, and so you can't do it. And so it doesn't matter what your intentions are at that point, because you're acting in conscious defiance of an agreed upon consensus established through a democratic process, a law being the end result of that. But you don't have any of those laws on the books. So because you don't have any of those laws on the books, his intentions do matter. And then you look at, okay, what are the intentions? Can we prove beyond a reasonable doubt? Again, it's not about what you think his intentions may have been. Can you prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he had violent, murderous intent that night, or that his intent was to recklessly endanger the safety of the people at the protest that night? And that claim is very difficult to make when you see the evidence unfold. The media talking all this bullshit about how he crossed state lines. They didn't mention the fact that he lives just across the Illinois border, and so crossing
Right.
state lines is a fairly routine thing, and that his father did live in Kenosha, and that he had worked in Kenosha in the past.
I
So he
think
did.
I think also his grandmother and his cousins lived in Kenosha.
Okay, so he had family ties and work ties to this town. It's not like he just took it upon himself to go to some random place that he was not invested in. He had worked there before. His father lived there. He had family there. Okay. This presumption that he had violent motives is also undermined by photo evidence showing him, wiping off the spray paint off of the school earlier that day, and video footage reviewed by the New York Times that showed him offering medical assistance to injured protesters themselves. And so there's a lot of evidence that complicates the narrative, if not totally delegitimizes the narrative, that this was just a hot-headed white supremacist kid who decided he was going to go to a Black Lives Matter riot and provoke violence so that he can shoot some of the protesters there. I mean, so what I'm saying is that given the fact that there's no laws on the books keeping him from bringing that gun to that rally, his intention matters. You then have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he had ill intentions going there. And given all the stuff I just narrated, it is impossible. It is impossible for a jury to honestly say that beyond a reasonable doubt, this guy was there to cause trouble and hurt people. You cannot say that. You cannot say that. And any indignations that you have about how other people in marginalized groups wouldn't get the benefit of that doubt. Yes, if he were Black and he showed up at a MAGA rally, he wouldn't even be getting a trial. He'd have 50 holes in him within a few minutes. That's valid. That's valid. I agree with that 100%. We've spoken in defense of BLM God knows how many times on this show. I've written, I don't even know how many articles on it. I've done episodes on it. We had Black Lives Matter activists who were actually violently attacked by hot-headed, Trump-loving MAGA morons. I gave them a whole episode to come and tell that stuff. I don't think my politics are in question here. But this is not a question of politics. This is a question of, in a murder trial, you must be able to prove a person's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt if you are going to lock them in a cage for the rest of their life. That is what is at stake in the trial. That is what a criminal jury trial is all about. That's what these jurors are tasked with, making that decision and that decision only. Not, do we have an obligation to balance out past injustices by committing an injustice here and throwing this kid in jail? Even that's not, if that's the world you want to live in, then our politics are not the same. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Well, that's not a world you want to live in, I promise.
we're tradition, the word has taken on a different connotation now, but we're traditional liberals. Which, part of that is, traditional kind of ACLU take on civil liberties and the justice system and how it's supposed to work. It should not matter whether or not you find the defendant odious. That's irrelevant. We used to understand as a country how dangerous it is to go down that road of assuming that different people should be treated differently. And some would argue, well, but different people do get treated differently. Absolutely. And that is something that should be fought against, but you're fighting it in the wrong direction if you're saying you want him treated as badly as people of color are treated.
Right.
And
That's
that's
just
where
the
it goes
downward
back to
spiral.
that's where it goes back to the economic model. Good. The white people are poor now. Like
Right.
you're going in the wrong direction. You need to lift everybody up, not drag other people down. So everyone is just in the muck and the mire.
Well, but
That
this is why the media narrative of Rittenhouse as a symbol of power is so insidious.
look,
Because
a nuance.
if you look at, because what we're talking about is, yes, the reason why this happened is because of a collapsing social order, which was the first article I wrote on this. That's why this happened. This happened because the society is going to hell. And if you want to stop things like this from happening, things like what happened to Jacob Blake from happening, things like the murder of George Floyd from happening, you have to change the system. You have to change the system, and changing the system means changing the dynamic where the supposed party of the people, the supposed party that's against all that, would rather funnel $28 billion a year to their wealthy donors than fund community college. That's what you have to change. But Joy Reid will never tell you that. I guarantee Joy Reid will never tell you that. Joy Reid wants you to believe that the emblem of the societal rot that we're living through right now is Kyle Rittenhouse. Right? And so to them, and so if you absorb that narrative, then you are making systemic progress by locking him up. And of course, that's completely false. It's completely false. And it is a straw man. It is a cave painting, right? And so that will be my main point.
Yes. I like I said, I spoke to some people who were very much on that side of it. And, you have to remember people who think like this only talk to other people who think like this. And they live in their own universe, oh, I saw a meme the other day that said you should find someone who loves you like the judge loves Kyle Rittenhouse. Like this is their world. This is their world, and nobody that they encounter contradicts them. And certainly no one on the media platforms that they favor contradict them. And if you look at people who have raised these concerns, like Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi, this really, really is very revealing. Whenever you get into a debate with these kinds of, they're half left, half liberal, or all liberal, when you drop a quote from Glenn Greenwald or Taibbi, like, within their universe, they're persona non grata. They're enemies of the state. Like they don't have valid opinions because they don't toe the party line. And at that point, how can you really make any progress? How can you advance in any way? Like,
well, I sent you a link to the Greenwald video on this before we turned on.
I saw some of it. It's similar. His is more on the legal side, as you would expect with Taibbi. It's more on the media side.
Sure. I mean, one of the great points that Greenwald made, and then you can start, because I would like you to read some from the Taibbi, since you're a paid subscriber of his. I only saw the excerpts. But Greenwald, one of the things he said, I'm not sure if you got to this point in the video, he said, it's a really tragic situation when you can't even express a point to people without them branding you as this sort of like vile, insidious actor. Like, I know no matter what we say, we've been on for 40 minutes here. No matter what I say, there are certain listeners who, if I don't come on and say that this was a disgusting miscarriage of justice and that Rittenhouse should be in jail like the little punk ass murdering piece of Nazi shit that he is, if I don't say that, it doesn't matter what I say. But what I would say,
Well,
if you are one of
that's
those
why you're never
listeners,
getting the $30,000 Maddow a
well, right.
day
But
deal.
I would say if you're one of those listeners for whom it doesn't matter what I say, if I don't say the exact thing you want to hear, I would challenge you by saying it never mattered what I said. You never listened to us because you cared what we said. You only listened to us in the first place because generally we confirmed a lot of your biases. And so you liked listening to us because you agreed with us and because we made you feel like you were less alone and stuff like that. And I'm not saying there's no value to any of that, but it really never mattered what we said. It wasn't like, oh, I trust these guys to think about things and comment on them in a certain way, so maybe I'll learn something or my mind will be open. No, if you're one of these people who can't tolerate this conversation, which most of you who are still listening are probably not in that camp. Whatever subscribers we lost probably tuned out a half hour ago.
Yeah.
So hopefully I'm not talking to any of you guys still now. But if I am,
Oh
I
my
would
God,
say it probably
they're
never
gonna give
mattered
this a
what we
fair
said.
hearing. How dare they?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, talk about the Taibbi piece a little bit because I didn't read.
All
I
right.
only read the excerpt that he released to the
So,
freeloaders like me.
Taibbi's take on a lot of things is just, his father was a reporter. He grew up in the news business. And a lot of Taibbi's stuff is just, he's clearly horrified by what the media has turned into and the way that it covers events like this. So I'll read a bit of this. In a tinderbox situation like this one, it was reckless beyond belief for analysts to tell audiences Rittenhouse was a murderer when many, if not most of them, had a good idea he would be acquitted. But that's exactly what most outlets did. This is separate and apart from the question of whether or not you like Kyle Rittenhouse or agree with his politics, or if, as a parent, you would want your own teenager carrying an AR-15 into a chaotic protest zone. The huge media error here was of the walls are closing in variety, except the context was far worse. The walls are closing in stupidity raised vague expectations among hashtag resistance audiences that at some unfixed point in time, Donald Trump would be pushed from office by scandal. In this case, the same people who poured out onto the streets last summer were told over and over that Rittenhouse was guilty, setting the stage for shock and horror if and when the quote unquote wrong verdict came back. Media figures got every element of this story wrong. As documented by TK contributor Matt Orfalea, the Young Turks alone spat out all sorts of misconceptions with shocking inattention. That Rittenhouse was shooting randomly at people after falling down, that he'd fired first, that there was no evidence that anyone had raised a gun at him, among many, many other errors. Belatedly, the show conceded some of these problems. However, they had access to the correct information in most of these cases on the night of the shootings. The Young Turks showed restraint relative to other outlets. Joe Scarborough on MSNBC said Rittenhouse unloaded about 60 rounds into the crowd. It was 8. Adding in another segment that he drove across state lines and started shooting people up. And in still another that he was shooting wildly, running around, acting like a rent-a-cop, trying to protect property in a town he doesn't know. His father and other relatives lived there. John Heilman on the same channel said Rittenhouse was arguably a domestic terrorist who crossed state lines to go and shoot people. Bakari Sellers, CNN, quote, the only person who fired shot that night was Kyle Rittenhouse, unquote. Parentheses, he didn't fire first, and protesters actually fired more rounds. So, this is what I'm saying. Like, if this garbage in, garbage out, if this is where you get your information from, they don't care about reporting facts. They know, just like you just said, like the audience doesn't penalize you for telling them what they want to hear. They only penalize you for not telling them what they want to hear. And these outlets are in the business of telling people what they want to hear, and their audience has demonstrated what's left of it. That has demonstrated. I mean, the people who were left after Russiagate watching this shit, I mean, what could they possibly do to lose these people?
Well, sure, but I mean, this goes beyond that because look, if this were
the only thing they could do to lose
just
those people would be to tell the truth, or to
well,
come up
sure,
with a nuanced narrative.
If this were just a phenomenon where like all of the shit libs were on the same page, then this wouldn't be as troubling because yes, there are a lot of people who whatever Joey Reid says, they take it seriously, and that's it. There are a lot of people who are on the left, and oddly enough, I don't want to get into this, but Jimmy Dore had a lot of defenders when he was caught sort of fudging the story on the vaccine that we covered in our last live stream. And a lot of people came after us, more me than you, for pointing that out and literally taking the opinion that, there were people who literally put in the comments, Jimmy Dore is a real leftist and anyone who criticizes him is a shill, right? The complete idiocy of that just absolute fucking stupidity. Ironically, though, a few days later, Jimmy Dore defended Kyle Rittenhouse, and that was enough to shake a lot of these people into, oh my God, maybe this guy is not saying the word of God all the time, right? So, so there are a lot of people who consider themselves diehard leftists who basically are taking the stance that, like, if you think this was the right verdict, fuck off, never talk to me ever again. And I saw one person on Twitter, I should have screen capped this because this was a very, very intelligent response. He put it kind of snarkily in the term of a hashtag, but he's like, real leftists question the necessity of locking anyone in jail ever under any circumstance. And I think that is much more true than what we're saying. Like, one of the things, and I've evolved in this way over the course of doing this show, because one of the first episodes we did in this show was with a prison abolitionist. And even though I'm not on the page of no jails ever, no matter what, that did change my way of thinking. It has a light bulb go off in your head. Like, isn't sentencing out of control in this country? We just cavalierly recommend 10, 20-year sentences for people. Don't we have too many people in jail? Like, by far the most incarcerated first world country on earth per capita.
Per capita, yes.
Like, yes. And aren't you only serving to perpetuate that system by expressing bloodlust over this dumbass 17-year-old kid who did something that he absolutely should not have done? But at the end of the day, evidence clearly shows that it is impossible to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he had ill intent that night. Notice I have not said evidence clearly shows he is 100% innocent, because I don't know that. But that's the point, is I don't know that. I can't vote guilty to put him in jail for the rest of his life unless I know that. And there's too much evidence that flies in the face of it. Could he be a racist, Trump-loving little shit who made the white power symbol at the bar? Yes. Could he be a little fuck? Absolutely, he could be a little fuck. Could he have had fantasies of vigilante justice in his mind that night? He could have, but I can't prove it. And if you can't prove it, you can't lock him up over it. It's that simple. That's the law. And trust me, you do not want to live in a world where that is not the case, because sooner or later you are going to be on the receiving end of this.
Exactly.
And you do not want, so what? They because even the people who say, like, there's a meme that has, Rittenhouse, and I think it's the Simpsons logo, where like certain light shades of skin, not guilty, and then certain dark shades of skin, guilty. Again, right. That's true. I agree with that.
Yes.
I agree with that Black people are much more likely to be found guilty in these situations than white people, if they even get a trial.
If they even get there, because they'd be dead.
Right.
A Black person was running.
But is the answer? But
when they are 15,
right?
Like
but the idea that locking Kyle Rittenhouse up when he doesn't deserve to be locked up, based on the facts of the case, the evidence of the case, and the law, locking him up is not going to do fuck all in changing that dynamic. If anything, you are only strengthening a system based on vengeance, retribution, and incarceration. And a real leftist, in my opinion, what I would consider a real leftist, wants to move away from that. They don't want to use that system to exact vengeance upon people they don't like. Because what it sounds like you're saying is you want white people to be assumed guilty just as Black people are. And where that leads is anyone who the media doesn't like is guilty.
Yep.
Anyone who Joy Reid says is a piece of shit, whether you're white or Black, you go away. That's not a world any of you want to live in. I swear to you. I promise you that. And the world we do live in now is extremely unfair, which is why we have to change that also. And I don't want that to get lost in this. I'm not saying this to defend the status quo. I'm saying that there is a way to productively change the status quo, which is what I thought being on the left was all about. It's all about raising consciousness. It's all about liberation, struggle, class struggle being a part of that liberation struggle. It's about liberation, not incarceration. You don't correct a societal problem by saying we're going to start locking innocent white people up to make up for the fact that we've locked innocent black people up. What kind of backwards fucking political world are you looking to create? And how do you, and if that's what the left wants, then maybe I'm not on the left anymore. But I don't think that's what I mean. As I understand everything I understand about left politics, says that we should strive for a better world, not a worse one, in which anyone who gets on the wrong side of Joyanne fucking Reed gets to be locked up for the rest of their life because they bully the jury.
Well, this is something I often argue. Also, people don't, people are deep into the depths of this kind of thinking. They don't want to hear it, but it's just obvious logic. Okay, let's say you're 100% right. Let's say you're 100% right. Like morally, you got it. It's nailed. Your theory of society, intersectionality, it's all true. All of that. It's not a new meta narrative replacing another meta narrative, but it's the absolute objective truth. Okay, so the largest voting bloc in the country is going to remain non-college educated white people for the foreseeable future. Yes, they're going to lose voting share and stuff, but that's going to be the largest voting bloc. How on earth do you think you are going to gain power that will allow you to legislate and try to ameliorate some of this when your basic calling card is white people are evil? Now, your friend from the dorm at Yale, your white male friend might go along with that, but those people are not going to go along with that. Most people are not from Yale, okay? When you come out like that, and you might want to argue, well, that's because they're racist. Well, in the wake of the George Floyd verdict, 80% of people were for police reform. And, 80% of the people in the country are not people of color. So that's a lot of white people who felt that way. But when you come back at them telling them you're inherently racist, and not only that, if you really want to get into D'Angelo land, not only are you inherently racist, there's nothing you can do about it. You're always going to have this original sin of racism in your soul. So you have to constantly genuflect to everyone who's not of your demographic because you have original sin. That is not a winning politics, folks. I'm sorry.
Well, I would say, I mean, yes, I think you're right about that, but I would also just say that when we talk about Robin DiAngelo,
Republican just won, I believe it's Columbia, South Carolina. Republican just beat the Democrat for mayor in a city that Biden won by 40 points. Do you know what kind of a whiteout you're looking at in 2022?
Like I said, I've never been more certain that it's a Trump landslide in 3 years than I am now, unless something radically changes, and I don't see that happening. At this rate, it's you could write it down, everybody, mark it down. Saturday, November 20th, 2021. Keaton Weiss projects Donald Trump reelected the 45th president. What would it be? Would he be 47? No, he'd be 45. It'd be 45, 46, back to 45. Anyway, the thing with Robin DiAngelo, it's the same. It's the same critique that the media pushes, which is that individual people are agents of oppression. Individual working class people are agents of oppressive power. Yeah. She gets paid by the bosses to go in and lecture the workers about how they need to get their act together to combat racism, as if the onus is on the little guy, as if these racial tensions are not a symptom of a systemic failure because the system has been built by the kinds of people who hire Robin DiAngelo to come in and lecture the workers.
Right. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And that's the main game that's being played here. The main game that's being played here is that people in the media want to put the onus of fixing society on individual actors with little to no power. because they do not want to put that same onus on people in power, as we talked about earlier. We have a listener right now who lives in Columbia, South Carolina. It says because the other lady was caught in so many ethics and financial scandals that she took tax dollars from or gave inappropriate accounts to her husband on the local school board, her mom, or their friends.
But
Sounds
these
like
are
a
the
Democrat to
Democrats.
me.
That kind
Right,
of
yes.
thing's never mattered before.
Sounds like a Democrat to me. Yeah, I don't see why that would matter.
That's why Pelosi calls that Thursday.
Exactly. Speaking of Thursday, I hope everybody has a happy Thanksgiving. We do got to wrap this show up now, but this was a good one. Thank you guys all very much for watching. The people who tuned in on Facebook. Let me see. I'm just reading another comment here. Okay, this is a long one. Okay, it seems like we've pretty much addressed what you've said earlier in the episode, so I don't have time to get into this now. What you're missing is that we were all shown beyond the shadow of a doubt that in Wisconsin, yeah, sorry, you know, finishing that thought there. Your thesis seems to be here. Yeah, he was a whack job, armed whack job, shooting and killing people while claiming self-defense because they disagreed with me and I felt threatened. Is scary. He was caught on camera. He had no business being there, armed to the gills. I don't think he had any business being there, armed to the gills. Unfortunately, this is not a sane country. We didn't have any laws on the book saying he was not allowed to be there armed to the gills. I don't know if you noticed this. Half the country fucking has a fucking Gadsden flag on their lawn. Half the country, you know, revels in this sort of like mythology of self-defense and stuff like that. The bad apples do not include a handful of cops, judge and jury. Also, yeah, I addressed all the video evidence, man. I saw the footage from many different angles, many different times. So I know what was caught on camera. What was caught on camera is exactly what I outlined about a half an hour ago. You can go back and listening to it. If he were protecting a business, why wasn't he behind a barricade at said business rather than roaming the streets? Well, he wasn't roaming the streets when Joseph Rosenbaum attacked him. He was standing in front of a business. He was standing in a lot, and Joseph Rosenbaum came at him. And then once he shot Rosenbaum, after Rosenbaum lunged for him, then he walked down the street towards the police to try and get the cops. And that's when the other two guys came out. And so that's just what the video says. I mean, that's pretty obvious. All right.
Like, yeah,
but
so you should not, the law should be such that that was not even possible.
Right. The law should be such.
But they're not. And when you sit there and you watch the video, it's clear that everything proceeds from there. That nobody's really there to kill anybody. It's a series of tragic events where you have a mentally ill person happens to be in the crowd who gets everything rolling. If he hadn't been there, none of this might have happened. It was just one of those things. He got it going, and once
right,
Kyle
and if
Rittenhouse
Rittenhouse didn't
him,
have the gun there, none of this would have happened either. I mean, the only people killed that night were killed at Rittenhouse's hand, so he should not have been there. Absolutely agree 100%.
But
and if this were a sane country that had laws on the books saying you're not allowed to be there, and if you go there with that kind of weapon, don't cry self-defense when something happens, then you would have the basis for a prosecution. You don't have that in the law because this is a fucked up Wild West paranoid frontier country. That's why you don't have it in the law. It's not like a local failing of the fucking Kenosha City Council. There's a systemic problem where the country just allows for this kind of shit. And can you, beyond a reasonable doubt, say that this 17-year-old kid acted in conscious defiance of the law and with ill and reckless intent to harm other people? I do not think, based on the evidence, you can say that. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe wherever you saw it, on YouTube, on Rumble, or on Facebook. We have channels on all three of those platforms. Also, consider helping us create more content by becoming a member at patreon.com/do-dissidents or on Facebook, where you can become a supporter right through our Facebook page and get bonus content every week, as well as call-in access to our live stream shows. Thank you very much for your continued support.